You are on the What I Never Saw channel. Enjoy watching.
I've always been the type to give the benefit of the doubt. I was raised on it. My mother used to say, trust is like a porcelain dish. You don't drop it over a smudge. So I learned to overlook small things. An unanswered call, a forgotten detail, a change in routine. That's what relationships are, right? Compromise, faith, and a little bit of self-delusion. But that night, everything changed. It was just past midnight when Madison came home. We live in Scottsdale, and she'd been at some charity dinner for a tech startups foundation. One of those desert chic venues where the lights are dim, the music is acoustic, and the wine flows like they're trying to impress someone's investors. She told me not to wait up. I told her I wouldn't. I lied. I was wide awake when I heard the garage door groan open. I clicked off the TV and stood in the dark kitchen, waiting to hear her heels click against the tile. Instead, it was the door swinging open, then silence. That hesitation just a second too long, like she was composing herself before stepping inside. When she finally walked in, I noticed three things instantly. First, the smell. Not hers. Not anything I'd smelled on her before. She normally wears this warm, citrusy perfume, subtle, like vanilla and something earthy. But this was sharper, woodsy, expensive. It hit before she even closed the door. Second, her hair. It was pinned up earlier in the evening. I saw her before she left. She made me zip the back of her dress, then gave me a peck on the cheek and said, "Don't burn the house down." That version of her looked like she belonged on the cover of a desert lifestyle magazine. Now her hair was down, half down, really, tousled like it had been gently taken apart by someone's fingers, not her own. Third, the collar. There was a faint red smear. Not wine, not sauce, lipstick. The color was just a little too bold for her. Madison doesn't wear reds like that. She's a mocha rose type, muted tones. The kind that say, I'm polished, not loud. But this was brazen, hot red. A single smear near the edge of her collarbone, almost hidden by the shadow of her jacket. She dropped her keys on the kitchen counter and gave me a little surprised smile. "Oh, hey, you're up." "Couldn't sleep," I replied. She walked past me toward the fridge like nothing was off. It was a madhouse. You'd think half of Scottsdale showed up just for the dessert table. I watched her from behind. That was another thing. Her blouse was unbuttoned one extra notch than it was earlier. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Unless you're someone who notices things, like I do. "You smell different," I said. She froze for a split second. Flash. Then the fridge door swung open and she grabbed a bottle of water. "Probably from one of the guys I hugged," she said with a shrug, twisting the cap. It was packed. Honestly, it felt like an upscale mosh pit in there. She turned around and leaned on the counter. Her expression was perfectly casual. Too casual. That kind of manufactured nonchalance that people use when they're trying not to trigger a lie detector. "Is that lipstick?" I asked, pointing gently toward her collar. Madison glanced down. She squinted at the mark, tilted her head, and then laughed. Not nervously, more like she'd been handed a cue card. "Oh, that must be from Sophie," she said, waving it off. "You know how she greets people. Both arms, tight hug, full face press. I swear I left with half her makeup on me." She took a long sip of water, then walked toward me, placing her hand lightly on my chest. "You're really on edge lately," she said. "Everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But the smell, that cologne, was still hanging in the air like smoke after fireworks. "I've just been stressed," I said quietly. "Deadlines, vendors, that new account." She nodded, her eyes scanning mine. "Well, don't turn into a suspicious husband on top of it all. That's not a good look on you." That stung a little. She smiled and walked upstairs, calling out over her shoulder, "I'm jumping in the shower. I feel like I'm wearing other people's sweat." I stood there for a long time after the water started running. Long enough to hear the click of the bathroom door, the pipes groaning. I walked over to her coat draped across the back of a chair and lifted the sleeve to my nose. The scent wasn't hers. Definitely not Sophie's either. It was masculine, deep, musky, and deliberate. It wasn't one of those faint aftershaves you catch at the office or in a rideshare. No, this was skin clothes. This was worn by someone who wanted to be remembered. I sat down at the counter and looked at her wine glass from the night before. Still a ring at the bottom. Next to it was her phone screen down. Always screen down. I never used to notice that. Now I noticed everything. The thing is, it's not just about a smell or a stain. It's about how easily the story came out of her mouth. How quickly she had a name, a scenario, a distraction. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't even uncertain. It was rehearsed. And then I remembered something she told me months ago. Something that didn't seem important at the time. She once said, "If a woman ever cheats, she'll never come home wearing guilt. She'll come home polished." That line hit me like S***cur punch now. Because Madison didn't come home looking guilty. She came home polished. And all I could think, sitting there in the dark kitchen, was, how long have I been making excuses for her? After that night, it was like a dam broke in my mind. I didn't confront her. I didn't go through her phone. I didn't storm out or scream into the void. Instead, I did something far more dangerous. I started remembering. Not in fragments or brief flashes. No, this was a real playing back in real time. Every moment I had quietly buried coming back to life with full color and brutal clarity. And once you start looking, it's impossible not to see. It began with the nights she worked late. They were always framed as project deadlines or client dinners. And I had no reason to doubt her at the time. Madison had a sharp mind for business, and she'd recently been promoted to regional marketing director. Late nights came with the title. I even admired her hustle. I'd bring her coffee when she was still at the office past 10. Not realizing I was feeding a story, not supporting a spouse. I remembered the first time I noticed her leaving her phone face down during dinner. It had vibrated 3 times in a row. I glanced at it out of habit, but she slid it away with this little forced laugh. "Work. They're relentless lately," she'd said. That should have been a red flag. We'd always had a relaxed phone policy. We shared everything. Passwords, calendars, playlists. But around the same time the late nights began, so did her new attachment to her phone. Like it was a lifeline. Or a bomb waiting to go off. I can't believe how casually I let that go. Then there were the business trips. She'd only started traveling regularly about 6 months ago. First, it made sense. Her company had expanded into Florida, and she was put in charge of the Miami account. She'd leave for 2 or 3 days, max. But then the trips got longer. For nights. Sometimes 5. Always booked last minute. Always non-refundable. One time, she claimed the hotel overbooked and put her in a different suite than the one listed on the itinerary. I'd only asked because I tried to surprise her with a flower delivery. One of those small things husbands do when they're trying to remind their wives they're still paying attention. The florist called to say the front desk didn't have anyone by that name checked in. She brushed it off. "It must have been under the company's block," she said. "Honestly, babe, it's not a big deal." But it was. Even then, I remember something tugging at the back of my mind. A restlessness. Like a quiet alarm going off that I chose to mute. Because the alternative was too painful to consider. I didn't want to be the guy who suspected his wife of cheating without hard proof. That felt insecure, weak, paranoid. So instead of investigating, I rationalized. I told myself she was tired, that she was under pressure, that people change in high-stress careers. I never stopped to think that maybe she wasn't just changing. Maybe she was separating. Quietly, intentionally. There was also the gym. Madison joined a 24-hour fitness club about 4 months ago. She said it helped her decompress after work. And again, I supported her. I was proud of her for making time for herself. But after a while, the sessions got longer. She'd leave after dinner and return just before midnight, hair damp, makeup touched up, not sweat wiped, but refreshed, cleaned. When I once joked that she was probably secretly training to join American Ninja Warrior, she didn't laugh. She just gave me a half smile and said, "You never know." I even asked if I could join her sometime. She paused. "It's kind of my alone time," she said carefully. No offense. I just need space to think. And like a fool, I nodded, because I wanted to believe that was healthy, that she was taking care of herself, that her distance wasn't because she was drifting from me, but toward herself. That was easier to accept. Then there was the missed call. It happened a few months ago. We were in bed watching something mindless on Netflix. Her phone lit up. The name didn't show, just a number. One of those clean, suspiciously unsaved ones. She picked it up fast, stared for a second, then hit decline. The screen showed a blinking voicemail notification. Without thinking, I turned my head toward her. She caught my glance. Wrong number, she said, a little too quickly. Then she smiled. You jealous of random spam callers now? I tried to laugh. Not jealous, just curious. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. You've got nothing to worry about, Benny. But that wasn't a kiss of reassurance. Felt more like a sedative. Something to make me stop asking questions. And I did. I always did. What's worse is I had friends. People who noticed. One time my buddy Julian asked me why Madison never showed up to game night anymore. She's slammed at work, I said, automatically. He raised an eyebrow. Every week. I remember brushing it off like he was making something out of nothing. But deep down, even then, I knew. I just didn't want to know. Because once you let the truth in, you can't close the door again. I found myself thinking about that a lot in the following days. About how many signs I had filed away under normal. How many times I had chosen comfort over clarity. I thought about how Madison never forgot an excuse. How she never stumbled. Her stories were too clean. Too rounded at the edges. It wasn't just the lies, it was the ease. One night, I stood at the closet folding laundry and realized I hadn't seen her blue overnight bag in a while. The one she always used for business trips. I asked her where it was. Oh, it tore near the zipper, she replied. I tossed it last week, but I hadn't seen it in the trash. And she always asked before throwing away anything we bought together. That night, after she fell asleep, I checked the trunk of her car. The bag was there, zipper intact, clean, packed, and with it a second toothbrush. Not the travel kind we kept in our shared toiletries drawer. This one was still damp. Used. That was the moment something in me went still. I didn't say anything. I zipped the bag back up, closed the trunk, and went back inside. She was already asleep, or pretending to be. Her body curled away from mine like it had learned a new orientation. One that didn't involve me anymore. I lay there, wide awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering every word, every change, every shrug I had once forgiven. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't explode, it accumulates. Quietly, one choice at a time. And now I was seeing the pattern I had refused to see for months. Madison hadn't just rewritten the rules. She had rewritten the script. And somewhere along the way, without even noticing, I had gone from being her partner to being an extra in a story that no longer needed me in the lead. I don't know what pulled me to that cafe that morning. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near it. It was a Thursday midweek, ordinary. I'd left the house earlier than usual, intending to get to the office and power through some invoicing. But halfway there, I took a different turn. No music playing. No podcast. Just silence and a vague tug in my chest that said, don't go where you're supposed to go today. Go where you might find something. That's how I ended up parking near Millstone and Finch, the boutique coffee shop across town. Madison had mentioned it once or twice. Said it was her me-time spot when she needed quiet before meetings. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't checking up on her. At least that's what I told myself. I stepped out of the car and adjusted my tie in the window's reflection. I remember the sky was overcast, the air sharp with the scent of rain that hadn't yet come. There were no clouds when I left the house. Almost poetic. Really, how fast everything can shift without warning. The cafe was mostly windows, tall and clean, framed by ivy-covered brick. I hadn't even made it to the front door when I saw her. Madison, sitting at a small round table by the far window. I froze where I was, feet planted on the sidewalk, one hand still adjusting the cuff of my jacket. She wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, mid-30s, clean-shaven, tailored white shirt that hugged his frame like it had been custom-made. He wasn't touching her exactly, not overtly, but their bodies leaned toward each other like magnets already too close to resist. She was smiling, not her polite default smile. No, this was the smile I used to know, the one I hadn't seen in months, the one that didn't look like it belonged to me anymore. Her hand was on the table, palm up. His was resting gently on top of hers. That was the moment. Not the lipstick smudge. Not the late nights. Not the missed calls or mysterious gym sessions. This was the one I couldn't rationalize. Couldn't brush away. The world didn't stop, but it slowed. Like the universe gave me space to absorb it all frame by frame. Her eyes were soft, unhurried. She looked peaceful, like she had found something, or someone. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but she laughed at one point. Head tilted slightly back, shoulders relaxed. It was an ease I hadn't seen in her around me in a long time, and as twisted as it sounds, I wasn't even angry. I was numb. I stepped back slightly, careful not to catch her eye through the glass. They were so engrossed in each other. I doubt she would have noticed me unless I knocked. But I didn't knock. I pulled out my phone instead. I don't know why I did it. Maybe part of me wanted proof so I couldn't gaslight myself later. Maybe I knew she'd deny it, or find a way to shape it into something harmless. Just coffee. He's a client. You're being ridiculous. So I snapped the photo. One clean frame. Her hand. His hand. Her smile. Their closeness. The light catching her face just enough to burn it into my memory forever. I saved the image in a hidden folder on my phone. The one I'd created a week earlier but never thought I'd actually need. I named the file something unassuming, just a string of numbers. Nothing poetic. Just cold, hard data. Then I turned away. I didn't storm off. Didn't march in to confront them like in the movies. That's not who I am. And honestly, I don't think I could have handled hearing her lie to my face again. Not while sitting across from a man who clearly wasn't a secret anymore. Not to her. I walked to my car. The leather seat was still warm from where I'd sat earlier, but I suddenly felt like I didn't belong in my own vehicle. Like the steering wheel was unfamiliar. Like the air had shifted. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced at the rearview mirror. Not to see traffic, but to catch one last glimpse of them through the glass. They were still there. Still leaning in. Still laughing. I don't know how long I sat in the office parking lot before going inside. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe more. I kept staring at the photo I'd taken. Zooming in. Zooming out. Not because I didn't trust what I'd seen, but because I needed the shock to dull, and looking at it over and over again was the only way to steady myself. You always think you'll feel rage when it finally happens. That unmistakable evidence. That smoking G***N. But in reality, it's quiet. There's a drop in your stomach. A sudden hollowness. Like your body forgot how to be yours. I walked into work that day and said nothing. Smiled at my assistant. Replied to emails. Took a meeting about a vendor contract. I was fully present and completely gone. At one point, my coworker Theo passed by my desk and joked about how I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I smiled and said, "Didn't sleep well." That wasn't a lie. Not exactly. That night, Madison came home at her usual time. She kicked off her shoes in the hallway and made a beeline for the kitchen, where she started talking about a new campaign she was building. Her energy was higher than usual, almost bubbly. "I think I cracked the angle for the Dawson brand," she said, sipping wine. "It's emotional without being sappy. You'll love it." I nodded. "Sounds great." She didn't notice my eyes drifting to her left hand. There was a faint smudge of foundation near her ring, like it had been reapplied in a hurry. Her earrings were different than the ones she wore out that morning. Slightly fancier. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yeah, just a long day." She leaned in to kiss my cheek. I let her. She smelled faintly of vanilla again, like she'd swapped one scent for another. Later that night, while she was brushing her teeth, I opened the hidden folder again. I stared at the image until the screen dimmed and locked itself. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just sat with it. This was the new truth. Undeniable. Irrefutable. Not a suspicion. Not a hunch. But a moment captured, frozen in digital silence. What she didn't know, and what I hadn't yet decided, was what I'd do with it. I wasn't sure if I'd confront her. Not yet. Not when I still didn't know the depth of it. The man in the photo. I didn't have a name, a title, a role. But I knew what he meant. I knew what he represented. He was the answer to every question I'd asked myself over the past 6 months. The reason for the gaps. The weight behind her distance. The smile I'd stopped seeing. And now I had the one thing I'd been too afraid to admit I needed. Confirmation. I didn't need to shout or throw plates or accuse. I didn't need her to say it. I didn't even need an apology. What I needed, what I had now, was certainty. And with certainty comes preparation. Not revenge. Not confrontation. But something colder. Smarter. More permanent. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Not the day after. Not even the week after I took the photo through the cafe glass. Instead, I made space for silence. The kind of silence that doesn't scream or threaten, it calculates. And in that stillness, something in me shifted. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I stopped reacting and started planning. It began with the accounts. We had 3 joint ones. A checking account, a brokerage, and a travel savings fund we'd set up before the pandemic. All of them had her name tied to them. All of them vulnerable. So I called my advisor, a quiet man named Elliot who's handled our finances for the last decade. I need to separate all liquid assets, effective immediately, I told him. Everything okay? He asked, cautious. Everything's fine, I said. Just a long overdue restructuring. I had him remove her beneficiary status. Not revoke it with noise, but replace it with contingencies, new trusts, new language. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't punishing her. I was just insulating myself. Next came the will. I rewrote it over the course of 2 evenings. Madison had been the primary beneficiary of nearly everything. My estate, my pension, the Scottsdale house, even the Florida property we inherited from my aunt. I remember pausing at that section, staring at her name as if it were written in someone else's handwriting. Then I picked up the pen and crossed her out. In her place, I named my sister's daughter. She's 10. Sweet kid. Loves art. I hadn't seen her in months, but that wasn't the point. She hadn't betrayed me. She didn't smell like lies. I signed the documents in a notary's office across town where no one knew my name. 2 days later, I quietly transferred the Florida property's deed to a shell LLC I created under my initials. Not traceable on a surface-level search. Not flashy. Just protective. I'd bought that house years ago with inheritance money and never added Madison to the title. She'd always called it our vacation place, and I never corrected her. But it wasn't ours. It was mine. Now, legally and in every sense, it was untouchable. I checked our joint credit card and saw a recurring charge I hadn't noticed before. $128 a month to a co-working space in Midtown. Madison didn't freelance. She didn't run a side hustle. I made a mental note. Then I froze the account. She found out the next day. Did something happen with the visa? She asked, eyes scanning her phone. Oh, I said, feigning concern. Yeah, there was a breach. Fraud alert. I shut it down just to be safe. I'll set up a new one this week. She nodded, unconcerned, maybe even a little impressed. Good catch. Every day I got better at this. I started working with a private investigator named Mara. She was sharp, former cybersecurity analyst turned forensic snoop. Her pitch was simple. I dig up what you suspect and recover what they think they've deleted. I gave her access to everything, Madison's email aliases, old iCloud backups, even a second phone number I'd once seen her use for business. Within 72 hours, Mara had already retrieved fragments of chats from an encrypted messaging app one didn't even know Madison used. They weren't graphic, but they were int***. There were messages from a contact saved only as D. The same man from the cafe, I assumed. One message stood out. Wish you didn't have to leave so soon this morning. Still smells like you here. Still smells like you. I read it over and over, not because I needed confirmation, but because I needed to absorb the shape of her duplicity. There were also photos. Blurry selfies from hotel rooms. One of them had Madison in a silk robe I'd never seen before, holding a glass of wine, eyes half-lidded. No date stamp, just the implication. I didn't print them. I didn't save them to my laptop. I uploaded everything to an encrypted drive and locked it behind layers of passwords. I wasn't planning a war, but I was collecting the P***ns anyway. Madison remained unchanged, or maybe just unaware. She still made dinner twice a week, still reminded me to take my supplements, still kissed my cheek like nothing had shifted between us. But something had shifted. Me. I watched her more closely now, not with suspicion, but with a surgeon's detachment. I tracked patterns. An uptick in her gym attendance again. More strategy sessions that ran late. Once, she came home in a different blouse than she'd left in that morning. I asked about it. She said she'd spilled lunch. She was getting sloppy. The mistake people make when they cheat is assuming the person they're betraying is either stupid or too loving to look closely. What Madison didn't realize is that love doesn't blind you forever. Eventually, it sharpens your focus. I started recording our shared calendar entries. I made copies of receipts she left out on the counter. I called a friend of mine who works in real estate and asked for a market assessment on our house. Not because I planned to sell it, but because I wanted to know exactly what leverage I had. I wasn't angry, not outwardly, not in a way that showed, but something in me had calcified. One night, I came home late from work and found her asleep on the couch with a glass of wine half full on the coffee table. Her phone buzzed twice while she slept. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, watching the way her mouth twitched slightly as she dreamed. It struck me how different she looked when she wasn't performing. She looked younger, maybe even sad. But then her phone lit up again. Same contact. D. That was all I needed. I walked into my office and wrote down a list of names. Attorneys, mediators, my accountant. I didn't call anyone yet. I just made the list. It felt like placing the first bricks of a bunker. Because war isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's spreadsheets, digital trails, paperless trails of withdrawal. The beauty of this approach is she didn't see it coming. Madison had always been led at managing optics, at steering conflict just enough to keep things from boiling. She assumed I was still in the phase of suspicion, the emotional limbo of doubt. But she didn't know I'd moved past suspicion. I was now in preparation. By the end of that second week, I'd built an entire contingency structure behind her back. Financially, legally, emotionally. My passwords were changed. My beneficiaries reassigned. The only thing I hadn't done was confront her. Because I didn't need to, not yet. And in that quiet rearrangement, I found something I didn't expect. Control. Not the kind that seeks power over someone, but the kind that reclaims what you'd once given away without realizing it. She still thought she held the cards. She didn't realize the table had already been moved. It started with a phone call I didn't answer. A number I recognized, Madison's voice on the voicemail. Tight, controlled, masking urgency under the thinnest layer of casual concern. Hey babe, just checking. Could you call me when you get a minute? I need your signature for that old annuity we set up. No rush, just when you can. There was a pause before she added, hope your day's good. Click. I didn't call back. A few hours later, she texted. Then again, and again. Each one shorter than the last, her punctuation slowly unraveling. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because, for once, I wanted her to feel the absence of me, not just physically but structurally. She needed my name, my cooperation, my consent, and for the first time in our marriage I withheld it. The next day, a message came from her son, Blake. He was 22, had always been polite around me, if a little distracted. Madison raised him mostly on her own before we met, and while I tried to offer structure, job leads, budgeting help, quiet nudges toward responsibility, he floated through life like it owed him time to figure things out. I got a missed call from a local precinct, then a voicemail from Madison's sister. Something about Blake. An accident. A leased SUV, under Madison's name, wrapped around a traffic light at 2:30 in the morning. No injuries, thank God. But blood alcohol content? High enough to trigger charges. I didn't reach out. I knew what she was going to ask before she asked it. Sure enough, that evening she showed up at the house, posture tight, lips pressed in a careful smile. Her makeup was minimal, controlled. "Benjamin," she said from the doorway, "I'm not here to fight." I leaned against the hallway wall and said nothing. "I just need a signature," she continued, "to access the annuity for Blake's legal fees. It's complicated, and I just need your help right now." I nodded slowly. "The one in both our names?" She blinked. "Yes. I thought that one was off limits unless we agreed jointly." She looked down just briefly. "It was a backup plan. Neither of us thought we'd need it." "No," I said. "We didn't." We stood in silence for a beat. Then she pulled out a digital pad, the kind banks use for mobile authorization. "I've got the paperwork ready. It just needs your initials." I didn't touch it. "Benjamin," she said again, voice low, "please, this isn't about us. It's about Blake." And maybe that would have worked months ago. Maybe I would have softened. I liked the kid, but I'd already seen too many lies shaped into needs, too many emergencies that conveniently aligned with her agenda. So I asked, "Did you co-sign the lease?" Her lips parted. "What? The SUV. Did you co-sign it?" She hesitated. "He needed help getting approved," she said finally. "And you didn't tell me." Her arms folded. "I didn't think it was a big deal." I stepped back from the doorway. "I'm not signing anything." Her face twitched. Just slightly. "I'll figure something else out," she said stiffly. "I'll talk to the bank." "You do that." She left without saying goodbye. 2 days later, I got a notification that someone attempted to authorize a digital signature using my credentials. It flagged a mismatch and locked the transaction. Forgery. That was her next move. Subtle, desperate, traceable. I didn't report it. I didn't even confront her. I just logged the attempt, took a **T, and added it to my folder. Let her bury herself. What came next wasn't loud, but it was visible. Madison started to unravel. First, it was social. She'd always been a centerpiece at wine nights, networking events, fundraisers. Charming, poised, her presence like perfume in a room. Faint but unforgettable. But I noticed the difference in how people reacted to her now. Shorter replies, canceled brunches, an invisible shift in proximity. One of her old friends, Dana, who used to send her 3-minute voice messages filled with gossip and affection, suddenly left her on read for 2 days. Madison mentioned it with a forced smile. Weird. Maybe she's just busy. But she knew. The glitter was fading. I later found out from a former neighbor that word had started to spread. Whispers about Madison's outbursts at work. Questions about where she really was during her so-called retreats. Apparently, one of the newer wives in the social group saw her coming out of a hotel with someone who wasn't me. That's all it took. Scottsdale's reputation economy doesn't need proof. It just needs suggestion. Within a week, she went from the woman everyone wanted at their table to the woman who got side-eyed when she arrived late. The charm that used to earn her benefit of the doubt now drew suspicion. I stayed quiet. I let it all move on its own. There's something oddly surgical about watching a person's image collapse without your intervention. It's cleaner. No fingerprints. Just time doing the work. Then came the legal fallout. Blake's charges held. DUI. Reckless driving. Insurance denied the claim because he wasn't the primary on the lease. The law firm Madison hired hit a wall when trying to free up funds. Everything she used to have access to now needed my co-signature. Accounts that had once been fluid now said, frozen, redirected, requires additional approval. She sent 2 emails in a row, both under the subject line urgent, please. I didn't open them. Instead, I forwarded them to my lawyer just in case. It wasn't that I wanted to see her suffer. That's not what this was. But I wanted her to feel something real. Something that couldn't be rewritten, redirected, or excused. She'd spent the last year crafting an illusion, convincing herself, and others, that everything could be controlled if she just stayed ahead of the truth. But you can't cheat gravity. Sooner or later, the ground wins. She tried calling mutual friends, old contacts, even her former mentor at the agency. No one returned her messages. One of them accidentally replied to me instead. A misfired text that read, "I'm staying out of it. She's not who I thought she was." I didn't respond. I just saved the message and deleted the thread. The final straw came from her own mother. I'd always gotten along with Linda. She was sharp, polite, distant, but never cold. After Madison's father passed, she leaned on us both. Sent holiday cards. Asked about our finances like she was asking about the weather. But then she called me directly. "I heard about Blake," she said, voice even. "And about the situation." I waited. "I'm not calling to interfere," she added. "But I want you to know you've always handled things with grace. Thank you for not making it public." "Wasn't my story to tell," I said. She paused. "Still, you could have ruined her." I didn't say what I was thinking. She did that on her own. We hung up politely, and that somehow was more final than any divorce filing. When I saw Madison next, it wasn't planned. She showed up unannounced again. Not dressed like her usual self. No blazer, no shine. Just jeans and a t-shirt, hair tied back. She looked tired, older. She stood in the doorway and asked, "Is there any way we can fix this?" I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, "No," and I closed the door.